Welcome to the Long Take Review. I'm your host, Jen Subchakta Bankard, and I'm here with a couple of AI sympathizers. First, he's on standby, not off. It's PT McDiff. How's it going, PT?
We don't have robots to be free in the fridge. How about ice cream? I'm doing well. Jen. How are you?
So for some reason, that's really weird smushed together, like not in a conversation as it is in the movie. I'm doing
But
good.
I chose it anyway because I thought we could just, I had to do it.
It was a good choice. And he's probably not going to Dang Dang. It's Greg Cass. How's it going, Greg?
Oh, Jen, then we're the same. We can't go to heaven because you're not good and I'm not a person.
I was really banking on one of you because that's the iconic quote from the trailer. I was like, someone's got to use that one. We are here today to review The Creator, the new science fiction film. I had originally in here new science fiction epic or war epic. I had other genre designations and then took them away because I was like, well, we can just talk about that, I guess. But it's a new film by Gareth Edwards, who many know as the director of Rogue One and fewer know as the director of Godzilla. If you're listening to us for the first time, we'll have a spoiler-free section designed for those who have not yet had a chance to see the film. And then with a very clear alert, we've even got music now, we will shift to spoiler mode for the rest of the show. But first, we want to do a quick movie news check-in. All right, so for once, we have a very happy strike update. The WGA strike is over. Yay! And, obviously a lot depends on, we can't declare everything is good now because the SAG-AFTRA is still on strike, and they're still they're going to presumably start working out their deal now. But this is huge. And everything I've heard so far is largely positive that the writers got mostly what they wanted. And this was a huge, especially compared to where we started in the negotiations, that this was a big win for them.
I've heard much the same thing. I'm sure we both listened to Matt Bellamy's The Town, and he was kind of working over one of the WGA negotiators, trying to get him to admit something hadn't gone as well as they wanted. And the guy didn't budge. He said they are very, very pleased. Wow. And I think the worst it got is he said, well, there are some things that the studios can probably take advantage of. This way they're only releasing limited amounts of data about streaming shows. And he said, we'll take that fight next time. And that's what we do with these negotiations and these contracts. So I was surprised how positive the WGA representative sounded.
Yeah, the people I know who either work in the field or have close family who work in the field have said, kind of, again, across the board, like in non-public, off-the-record ways, they're like, no, this was great. We got everything that we needed. The strike was a really good choice. Obviously it was hard, but the producers ultimately realized and the studios needed to come down from their initial demands, and that they feel really good about it. I think the only thing, which again, I haven't heard it, but similar, I guess, to what Greg was saying, is I remember the last time there was the strike in the 2000s, the sort of, what about like streaming was kind of hanging as like, we didn't really negotiate that one, but we will eventually, we'll figure that out next time, which of course, within a few years became like, this is a real problem because we're not getting enough money for the work that we did in this new model, that maybe something like that could emerge as being more prominent. And again, the producers could find a way to, loopholes or openings where they can still, take advantage of the situation. But it feels like they were trying to future-proof it as much as possible, and that everyone feels good about it right now, and they're happy to be getting back to work. And we can get some announcements of movies that sound like bad ideas and TV shows like finally we can hear about them rebooting The Office.
Yeah. To me, the biggest thing, because I was looking at sort of lists of all the things that they were part of the deal. To me, the biggest thing, to go with what you were just talking about streaming and stuff like that, is that they now get bonus or residuals if a show or a film, I guess, gets at least 20% of the subscriber base viewing it. And so that's the percentage, I guess, is really big because it's like if they had designated a number of views, that doesn't really, there's no one size fits all, because if you're on a smaller streamer, or like if your movie is just smaller, right, is the type of movie that has a smaller audience, that's not really going to help.
I'm excited for the Apple TV shows that only have to win over one dude in the Midwest, and then they can be 20% of the viewing audience. It's
Ouch.
Big winners on the strike. I just want to give a shout out. I had not heard until this week this story about Drew Carey. Did you hear about Drew Carey?
No.
There are two diners in Los Angeles that he let it be known he would buy breakfast, lunch, or dinner for any WGA member who showed up. And so they haven't revealed how much money he spent, but estimates are like in the six figures to pay tons and tons of the strikers. And you know what, I had warm feelings towards Drew Carey in the mid-90s. I haven't thought about him much since, but like, all right, dude, way to stand up and put the game show money where your mouth is, and stand by the writers. So I was very impressed when that story emerged.
That's awesome. What a great story. I think the other big thing, to go to what Greg was saying earlier of like trying to find something that they were not satisfied with, I think just the amount of money that they gained, I think is much less than they asked for, right? Obviously, some of that is negotiation tactics of like you start high and then you knowing that you're going to have to work your way down. But I think the number I heard was like they had asked for an 11% increase in pay, and then like everyone was asking for more, but then I think it's the DGA already got 5%. That was their deal, and then now the WGA is 5%. So now they're thinking, SAG is probably going to be a similar thing. So I think just sheer dollar amount, like they came in a lot under, but I think part of that was probably to be expected.
And it seems like the momentum is with the SAG representatives now. It sounds like they'll start talks back up on Monday and, well, today, I guess, as you're listening to this, the 2nd of October. And that I assume that the hard work is done. Now it's what are we worth compared to the writers? Let's talk slight changes, but they've kind of agreed on the terms of the debate. Mm-hmm. So I think we might actually have summer movies next year to change everything from what we said last time we were on this very show.
Yes. Yeah, for sure. And then the other thing too, because very relevant to the movie we're going to be reviewing today, the AI stuff apparently went well. And I was listening to IndieWire's Screen Talk podcast, and which I don't recommend listening to that episode because they spoiled a bunch of Killers of the Flower Moon for me. And they were like, it's a true story. So like, no, it's not really a spoiler. And I was like, if you haven't read the book, which I have not, I was like, oh, like it was like, yeah. So if you're looking to stay clean for Killers of the Flower Moon, don't go listen to the episode. But I'm here to tell you, because I took a bullet for everybody, that they were talking about, because they interviewed one of the reporter that they had on the ground sort of covering the whole strike. And he said that the studios actually, the thing that didn't really get covered much is that the studios are actually quite concerned about the use of AI as well, because post the precedent setting case of you can't copyright it. They don't want people going around writing things with AI that then they can't own. Yep. So that case actually made a huge difference, I think, in terms of negotiations as well.
Yeah, I think there was speculation about that on this show between the three of us, and we were talking about
you in particular, I think, brought that up.
And that would make sense, and it's good that always did sort of feel like that was the their version of we're asking for 12%. Their version was just like we're asking for AI to be the first writer on everything. Was thrown out there to be negotiated away, and they really were just trying to get that number of raises and get the streaming number lined up. So I'm glad that they figured that out and have hopefully clear guidelines that will be useful until the robots take over.
Oh, anything else new in either of your movie worlds? I know Greg saw Paw Patrol this weekend.
I will just, what I saw this weekend was the re-release of the Talking Heads concert documentary, Stop Making Sense, which if anyone has the remote possibility of interest in seeing it, I highly recommend seeing it on a big screen with a full sound system. The remastering is incredible. It is if not the best, certainly in the running, a finalist for one of the best concert films ever made, and just exquisite Jonathan Demme directing and weird performances from a weird fun band, and just people were clapping and singing in the theater like they were in the audience.
Nice.
So definitely recommend that while it's still out and playing, if you have the inclination.
Well, and it can have that title for 2 more weeks until Taylor Swift comes and wipes all other concert movie history out
Annihilates everything
and
in the
all
theater.
other movies, period, ever.
Would love it if whoever directs the Eras tour wins Best Director 8 or 9 years later at the Oscars. That would be great.
I will pass on discussing Paw Patrol and just say the other thing we've been bouncing around between us is there were 4 new Wes Anderson short films that were released on Netflix, and it's really, really cool and really exciting. And because we OD'd in June on Wes Anderson, I don't think we have another episode planned on them. But if you listen to that episode or you just like Wes Anderson, these are very on brand. They are quite fun and quite worth the watch. For my money, I think the first of the 4 is, I forget the beginning of the title. Henry Sugar is the name in it. The Wonderful Life.
The Wonderful
Something
Henry
like-
Sugar.
And it's fantastic. It's the longest of them by I think it's double the length of any of the others, at least. But these are very much inspired by a love of Roald Dahl, and seems to involve a meticulous recreation of Roald Dahl's home writing shed. And instead of Roald Dahl, we sit Ralph Fiennes in it, and who doesn't want to show up for Ralph Fiennes? So highly recommended. Enjoy them, savor them. That put Wes Anderson at the top of my letterbox. I have watched 22 films directed by Wes Anderson this year because I covered all his shorts this year. So challenge on, long take review listeners. Watch and rank all 22 films directed. That does include the short version of Bottle Rocket that got their funding for the long version of Bottle Rocket. It's hard to get to 22.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So, as someone who hasn't used Letterboxd enough, is 22 unique things. It's not like you saw Atomic City 4 times, and so that's 4 of those 22.
Mostly because Atomic City is a movie that doesn't exist. But I saw Asteroid City 8 times. But yes, the way if you are a patron or a pro on Letterboxd, you can get these stats, and it's so worth it because you can like monkey around with all your stats all the time. And so they only count unique movies in a given year. So that is 22 different things directed by Wes Anderson. There's like and his short films include like an old H&M commercial and I think an American Express commercial. It's weird what they count, and this is true for any director. Music videos get counted and things like that. I know my friend Ben has been tracking Catherine Bigelow and ended up watching some weird like watch commercials, I think, to get his number up on her and things like that. So it's a weird thing, but you can really juice your stats by tracking down everything they've directed.
I just got found out for continuing my music-based weekend and reading about U2's concerts and the Sphere, because their mediocre new single is called Atomic City, and that got me confused in my brain because that's what I used to think the Wes Anderson movie was. I had just learned it. I had just knocked it down. That Bono ruined it for me.
My pitch for the Wes Anderson shorts that are now on Netflix is, and it's The Wonderful Story of Henry Sugar is the actual title. Two things. One, I don't recommend trying to watch them all in one sitting because the style of them, there's a lot of spoken narration, like as if someone's reading the Roald Dahl story, which is delightful because the actors are doing a great job with it. And it's just really fun how that plays along with them coming in and out of the scenes. But I will say that when I sat down to watch, I watched the first 2 and was like enthralled, and then got to the third one about rats and then fell asleep. So like, because it was just like too much. It was too much at the same frequency, I think, for me, in that sitting. Obviously it was at night and I was tired and stuff. So there are other factors involved as well. But I think for me, I was like wide awake. And then when I got to the third one, maybe the third one's also not as good, but like So I would say spread them out. I think that's why they're releasing them one at a time. They did release them one at a time this week. The other thing I would say too is like, even if you're not a huge Wes Anderson person, but you're a huge fan of handsome British actors, like this is treasure trove. Like Benedict Cumberbatch, Rupert Friend, like Dev Patel. Dev Patel is so good, and it's like it's the who's who of fancy British actors. So, yeah, that's my pitch.
Some great newbies to one of the complaints about Wes Anderson is that he reuses people, and he's really only reusing. Well, Rupert Friend had a small role in Asteroid/Atomic City, but he then, other than that, it's only Ray Fiennes, I think, because Dev Patel, Sir Ben Kingsley, who fits right into Wes Anderson world, and Richard Ayoade. Ayoade, thank you. From I always just know him from the IT Crowd, but he is in Star Wars and some other things of late. So great, fun comedic actor, and also really gets the kind of language of it.
Greg, you got bonoed. You called it Atomic.
I did that on purpose.
Oh, that wasn't on purpose? I assumed that was an extra dig at PT. Okay.
I'm just lobbing nukes towards LA.
Like so many... segue. Oh, you did it. Okay. That's in terms of just pure content, that's like not a great segue. We don't need PT, and I don't want that. That would be.
I was trying to think of something about AI writing Writers Guild strike bombs in Hollywood, but I didn't make it happen.
Okay. That's all right. So we want to do our short takes. I guess we'll fold into the short takes preambles as necessary, because I think at least Greg and I have sort of, like, in terms of our viewing experience, have a little added layer of complications. In Greg's case, anger, and so we'll start with the short takes. So, what were just your general reactions to the film? Spoiler free, obviously.
In general, I liked it. I think that it isn't perfect in any stretch of the imagination. I don't want to set it at a low bar of, it's just nice to see original, or at least, mostly theoretically original science fiction in the theater. But it is really nice to see original science fiction in the theater, and the visual wonder of it all, and the commitment of the actors to the characters made up for some of the narrative shortfalls that I think are present in the story. So I had a really good time, and I think anyone who is remotely intrigued by seeing what's out there in the trailers, or hearing our spoiler-free discussion of it, if it's sort of like, that sounds like I could be into it, they should check it out, because it's worth your time.
I'm in a lot of the same place. I think I will say I was maybe hoping it would blow me away, and it didn't quite blow me away. But that's more on me than the film itself. It is entirely solid, and in addition to everything PT said, seeing it on the big screen is worth it, because the visuals reward that and are very big, and kind of great to get lost in. And I will also add that I think the cast is really good. It's always a little iffy when you put a child at the center of your movie. But then when you stack around that child just some great, hey, I know that person, I think some people don't like John David Washington just purely out of Tenet, like PTSD, but he's always really great. Aww. And you get Ken Watanabe. I did not know for a long time that Allison Janney was in this, and that got me very excited to see CJ Craig go full military. And
She's
Gemma
great,
Chan doesn't get as much as those others, but warm feelings for her too. And it's like, oh yeah, remember the Eternals was a thing? I forgot about that, because life's been weird the last few years. But so overall, definitely positive. I think Gareth Edwards has hit a place that I will go just on his name for whatever projects he does in the future. But I did enjoy this one a lot. What about you, Jen?
I also enjoyed this movie, but it was one of those things where I was in awe as I was watching it and was like, whoa, because like lots of shiny sci-fi things. And then, but at the end, it does have a fairly emotional ending. But by the end, when the credits rolled, I was kind of like, huh. Like, and it felt like something. So when we get to the spoiler section, I really want to try to pinpoint what this is. But like, I felt like there was some element that was missing that was going to kind of blast it into the stratosphere. Because I think this movie had a ton of potential. And for me, it was like the world building like all the things that we look for kind of in a sci-fi world, A+. Like I was all in, and I was like eating all of it up, chewing all in the scenery as we're going through it, and being like, oh wow, as an alternative alternative world, timeline, future, universe, whatever you want to put it. I think it was really engaging and drew me in. But the actual story for me, it was sort of like, at the end of the day, I'm not sure if I connected with any of the characters in any substantial way. And the plot itself, kind of after everything is said and done, is kind of like pretty basic. So, which might not be what it was going for. Like, it was not, probably my guess is it was not prioritizing that kind of stuff, because it's like its major project. At least my impression is that the major agenda is like, let's build this world and create this this very like sci-fi dystopia kind of like thought experiment about what would the world be like if, and so I feel like it's on that front it really succeeded.
This is one of those movies where you can hear people list off reasons they don't like it and be like, yep, that's fair. Like, you're not sort of like, what were you watching? What were you like? I don't understand how you process narratives, but it's just like a lot of the complaints are very fair. I think it's just a matter of how much leeway you're willing to give it, or how much you like the things that are working in it, compared to some of these problems that, we might all of us might be able to be like, okay, sure, we'll let that go. And, but understandable if some people are just like, but this, what? Like, what's happening? Or, why is this what was chosen here? Yeah, I don't know. I think there's something interesting when it's, middling's not a good word for it, but it's like, it is in the middle somehow of having clear flaws and having clear, wins, but it's, how much are you going to enjoy the latter and forgive the former?
So I've actually seen this movie twice. Once was on for a very, very early preview screening. It was like a focus. I was part of like a focus group, basically. I mean, actually, I didn't, to be technical about it, I didn't make it to the focus group. They randomly selected a certain percentage of the audience to actually leave the theater and go participate in like presumably like a conference room type conversation to talk about the movie. I filled out a survey at the end. And I'm not going to talk, and I've been very, very good on this podcast of not revealing that I've seen this movie, that I saw this movie before it came out.
Just reveal
because
when
I signed a thing.
Said just tell people what month that was, like how long ago.
I feel like I want to say it was May, right?
I think it was May or June
ago. Yeah,
I just want them to appreciate your resolve in not sharing, because you have been so good about it. And
I was like, I'm just going to act like I've never seen it.
You didn't share on the podcast that you saw it, and you didn't share off the podcast any thought about what your impression was. Yeah. So you've been this lockbox about the creator. That I'm excited to hear more of your reactions.
Yeah, it was crazy because I feel like on the show I had just pinged it as like, hey, I found this movie mentioned on the internet. It seems really cool. Like, Gareth Edwards is making a sci-fi movie. Like, how is no one talking about this? And then I got a thing in my inbox because I subscribe to a couple of the like free screening listservs, and usually I ignore them because they're like movies that sound terrible, or for like kids under 12, and I'm like, I can't at 8:00. I can't take my child who's 6 to your movie. Like, I just can't do that. And so, but this one, it was like the creator, and I was like, what? Like, click. And it was a crazy experience, and one I really enjoyed. I had never been to a screening of a movie way that far in advance of it coming out, and it was not finished, and a lot of the visual effects had little placeholder like floating text that said like AI to indicate like, and it was just like I think the main scenes were Ken Watanabe's character had a bunch of stuff, robotics on him, but in the version I saw, he was just Ken Watanabe. So and it was like there was just a thing following him, being like, "This is an AI person," and so it was a lot of stuff like that, and so it was really cool. And like, so I've been racking my brain. It was long enough ago that I'm like, it's hard for me to pinpoint how much they changed, because it does feel like a different edit of the movie to me a little bit.
Interesting.
I can't confirm that, right, because I don't have the other copy of the movie handy and I can't fact check that. But like, my gut instinct when I was watching it was like, oh, they've changed a few things, nothing substantial. The basic plot was still the same. But in terms of just like the editing of some of the scenes and stuff like that felt different. So that was really cool. And then like, but my point is that I saw this movie, and then I saw it in an IMAX theater on Thursday night. The biggest theater is the same theater I've been talking about that I saw Oppenheimer in, and there was silence at the end of the movie both times, just pure silence, like just like, and people shuffling and stuff like that. So like, to me, I feel like that was really weird, because no one was like clapping or like, and they were just like, huh, that's a movie. And I feel like that speaks a lot to kind of the story of the movie and its sort of lack of punch, in my opinion.
I wonder if it also speaks maybe to that inclination. I feel like it wasn't that long ago that it was like people clapping at the end of a movie in a theater was derided. It's just sort of like, why would you do that? Like, they're not here. Like, it's like clapping when the plane lands. It's just like,
but
okay, calm down.
People in the IMAX theater on opening weekend on Thursday night are the ones who are most excited to see the movie. And first of all, the theater was mostly empty, and that was really creepy, because every time I go to this theater, it's packed, because it's usually for like a big tentpole blockbuster movie or Oppenheimer. Like, it was more packed for the last screening of Oppenheimer like 2 weeks ago or a week ago, or whenever it was that I saw it before it left IMAX. That theater was packed. This theater maybe had like 3 rows of people in it. So I don't know.
Yeah, well, I guess I was wondering, is it something about sort of the IP fueled,
maybe
Marvel movies, Star Wars movies, DC movies that get people to be like, yes, good, I'm happy with that thing that just happened, in a way that, like, liking the fact that this isn't one of those, that it is its own story, is also maybe suppressing the possibility of people being super excited. It also maybe doesn't, we can discuss the ending in the spoiler area, like maybe it's not exactly a concluding act that is going to get you
people stand up in their seats,
right, like cheering in the same way that I remember people clapping at the end of Oppenheimer, because like, not an upbeat ending, like, even though it was like, yes, this is great, like this is a wonderful piece of cinema, but like, you don't feel awesome at the end.
You don't want to cheer. That's fair. But my concern is, and I want to bring this back to, like, now I want to segue into the recommendation algorithm, because like, we're all recommending people go see this movie, even if it has flaws. I feel like, because it's a really good sci-fi world, and because it's original, though we will discuss how original later, I think. It is original. It's not tied to some IP. It's not part of the sequel machine. It's an important movie to go see and support. And I'm worried that like, the fact that my theater is empty is a sign that like, it's not going to do well.
So the only other data point I might give, I went on a Friday night here in Boston. It was half full in my IMAX theater, but that was actually the third night of screenings at this theater. So I don't know if yours had Wednesday night, but they snuck it out a little early here. Now, by degrees, that is not going to make the difference between success and failure. But, if you get the diehards for one of those, this has become part of like DC's business model. They charge $25 on Tuesday night, and you get to see the Batman even earlier. I never go to those because they're excluded from A-list almost always. I think the creator, they let you use your A-list. I think I would definitely say anybody who's of the like Star Wars Amblin generation, you'll love this. Like, you'll have a good time in exactly the way we said. You'll see something cool and original. I might be different than you all, but that's how I would put this in the file of like the Terminator movies or something like The Fifth Element, and for me personally, even Blade Runner, but I came to Blade Runner very late in life. But like all of those are movies I'm like, oh, cool, I'm glad I saw that, and don't need to watch 3 times a year every year till I die, right? Like, no disrespect to those filmmakers, but I don't think the creator will ever have that kind of rabid fan base of like a Star Wars or a Star Trek or a Lord of the Rings or something. I think it's likely to be more of a, yeah, that was a cool experience. And I really like, you know what it feels like? Here it is, Looper. I think it's going to be the Looper, right? Where it's like, yes, that was a fun time. That was a good time. But you don't see anybody cosplaying Looper. You don't see anybody, shouting out
Right.
Looper every year for their new rewatch. So I would say if any of those titles I just kind of word vomited out are things you like, dear listener, go for it. Because I think you won't regret seeing the creator.
I will just say, I mean, I like those name checks of those movies, even though I like some of them more than I think Greg does. But I think that
there's some Blade Runner slander just now.
Yeah, I mean, I'll say Terminator slander as well, because Anyway, I won't. We'll work that out. We'll negotiate that some other time. But I will say I'm going to borrow from a friend of mine who saw the movie separately. We didn't see it together, but we were texting about it today, and was in a similar place of like, yeah, some things worked really well and some things, didn't work quite as well. It's kind of a mixed bag. But his like log line for it was Blade Runner done by Terrence Malick if Malick grew up exclusively on anime. And I was like, okay, like I can see that there's something there. And I think with a sort of parentheses of, and without a story as maybe effective as Blade Runner or Terrence Malick or even really good anime movies, but I think that there's, if any of that like is piquing your interest, I feel like if you've ever wanted to see a movie, if you've ever been the kind of person that's like, this movie's about spaceships and robots, I'm interested, then you should go see this movie, because it's a movie in that zone that is doing something, on it in its own kind of corner. However successfully or groundbreaking it might be, it's doing that. And I'll also note, like, one of the things that people have been saying about it is how the visuals are so strong and how good it looks with such a relatively small budget. Between the sort of international gross and even, maybe it's only in third place here for the first weekend. I think it's like under 15 million so far, but the budget was only 75 or 80 million. So, that's not like one of these movies that's like, oh my God, all love from me and from Greg, not from Jen, to Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny.
I'm gonna live that down.
A movie she actively doesn't enjoy. But just kidding. But that, like, that needed to get to $500 million to break even. Like, this doesn't need that. Like, this could get by just on mid-range ticket sales into the award season, and will be successful in a way that hopefully will get the studios to realize this budget level of a movie is worth investing in. Again,
what are some other touchstones? I guess I'll share mine, and because I feel like the recommendation algorithm segment that we usually do operates under the premise that not everything is for everyone, and so we're trying to recommend it, like, if you like this, then you'll like this movie. And so I feel like the thing I thought of was District 9. It feels a lot like District 9 to me. But I think District 9 is a better movie because I believe that actually got some Oscar traction back in the day.
That was
right?
Best Picture nominated.
Right. So it's not quite operating at that level, but I feel like in terms of the feel of the world, I feel like it's very similar. And I will just say that, like, at the early screening I went to, I think both in terms of the survey you had to fill out to get a ticket to the screening I went to, and in they gave us envelopes and pencils and said, do not open this until we tell you to. And then it was really weird where they were like, you may now open the envelope, and you just hear like hundreds of people going very quietly because nothing else is happening, and just filling in their little Scantron sheets. But in both of those, they asked about other sci-fi movies. I think Arrival was on the list, and Interstellar, and like all of these very hard sci-fi movies. And I feel like this, I can see why they're doing that, to be like, oh, and the questions kept implying that they didn't really quite know how to market the movie, because they were like, are we going to go cut straight to the hard sci-fi nerds and that's it? Or does this movie have bigger blockbuster appeal? And I feel like there was a tension in a lot of the questions they asked about, like, which characters did you like the best? Or like, what was like, it was really interesting. I wish I had, I would have gotten in trouble, but I wish I had saved a copy, like taken a picture or saved a copy of the questions, because they were so interesting. But yeah, so I think hard sci-fi definitely, like, if especially like dystopian hard sci-fi, where it's like, oh, imagine a world where, I guess we don't want to spoil it too much, but like a world where AI is prevalent and people coexist with AI, right? And then some people are okay with that and some people are not. But to me, the other genre was like, this felt like a war film more than anything else, actually, in terms of the plot and the type of story. And a lot of the big set pieces,
including
kind
one
of like Black Hawk Down,
not quite big set piece, but one scene that was directly lifted from Platoon, essentially. So
yeah, that's right.
Yes. Yep. So I think that is a good comp to make. Here's a movie we haven't mentioned yet, but should be in this conversation, and I would actually put this ahead of it. When talking about AI movies, there's a movie called AI, starring Haley Joel Osment, and a lot of those themes are present here. I mean, I think that's a little more of the family-ish version of it. I don't remember that movie terribly well, but that's the Spielberg version. I know that's also a Kubrick film, kind of, sort of, but I think actually that might be the one it's most similar to in some of what it's digging up. So I would throw that one into the sci-fi mix. But I wouldn't go hard. I would not say Arrival. So don't market this as the new Arrival. I think you're going to get in trouble.
Right.
Yeah, the Deadline write-up of the weekend box office was comping it to Arrival, because I guess it was like, it's in line. Like, it was almost, just in terms of, gross numbers.
Yeah. The Martian, I think, was also on this list.
Right.
Now it's coming back to
That's interesting.
It's like, what?
But I guess Arrival, would this be true? 2016 was the last sort of mid-budget sci-fi movie that got like a little bit of attention, a little bit of legs. So I can see from the business side why you would do that, but that does so few favors to the creator to try to compare it to, and Gareth Edwards to compare it to Denis Villeneuve and Arrival, which is just trying to operate on a different level.
Yeah, that's true.
It would be very unfair. Yeah. Do you like? I think of all my students who think Interstellar is the best movie that's ever come out, and them going to see this movie and being like, "What? Like what? This doesn't make me think I'm smart at all. Like, I don't understand what's happening."
I do feel like some of the editing, again, without getting spoilers, some of the editing and the structure of scenes and the way they're edited did remind me a little bit of Arrival. And if I say more, I'm both spoiling the creator and Arrival. I feel like, which I don't want to do. But okay, yeah. So I think, yeah. So I guess who really is the target audience of this? If it's not the hard sci-fi Arrival crowd, I guess it's the Blade Runner crowd. I
mean, yeah. What's the term for? Is it soft sci-fi? Like, is it sort of like more action-y, adventure-y, or almost genre-y sci-fi, as opposed to
sci-fi adventure?
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's like what's Star Trek versus Star Wars. This is for Star Wars sci-fi people.
The tone of this movie is very serious. That's the only thing that's holding me back from that. You know what I mean? Like, there's no quippy adventure parts of this, really.
But I guess that's where, like, what's the overlap? I feel like that's where it gets more into the Blade Runner zone of it. Is this a more hard-boiled, instead of it being a noir movie, it's more of a behind-the-lines war movie in a sci-fi.
How about it's JJ Star Trek, not Roddenberry Star Trek? There we go.
Oh.
Not Justin Lin Star Trek.
I like it. I feel like that says a lot. That says a lot. You reached like 5 people and they're like, oh yeah, okay. Like,
or they're like, oh no, I don't want to see it now.
I'm gonna go see it now. Yeah. Yeah, because it does have a very propulsive, action-oriented plot.
Mhm.
Like there's urgency and we're moving from scene to scene and place to place, and there's danger at every turn. So it's like, yeah, it does have that kind of like, it's not, there aren't long periods of people just sitting around talking about things. And that's the other thing too, is like, if you're craving the like cerebral AI discussion, I feel like it's not actually in here that much. It's more the like, they can be people too, emotional.
Yeah.
It's like more pathos driven, I feel like. Whereas like if you're looking for something that's like ex machina, I feel like, where it's like actively there's discourse about like what AI is and what it can do and what it should do and all that kind of stuff. Like, or even like iRobot, not the Will Smith movie, but the books, I guess. You know what I mean? Like, I feel like that's AI to me is more of a backdrop of this movie than it is, or like a premise as a means to an end to tell this bigger war story is what I would say. But anyway, I think we're bumping up against spoilers, so I think maybe we need to go to spoiler mode.
Let's go.
Yeah. So if you have not seen the creator,
the only thing I'll say, sorry, before we go to spoiler mode, is we didn't hear Greg's story.
We'll lead
maybe he doesn't want to tell it
because that way I can give the full details.
Okay.
Oh, because there's okay.
So those of you who want to hear Greg's story and you haven't seen the creator, you got to go see it so you can hear the story. Come back and enter spoiler mode.
Right.
That's part of the tease.
We're about to enter spoiler mode. If you have not seen the creator, do not continue. Please go see the movie, because we want you to go see the movie and support this type of mid-budget sci-fi movie, and then come back and listen to us.
All right.
This is more Ocean's 11. This is why I liked it. PT sent me a bunch of bumper music clips, and I was like, Ocean's 11. We are now in spoiler mode. If you have not seen the creator, the space is no longer safe for you. And usually right after spoiler mode, I like to go straight to the most spoilery of spoilers. But Greg had a story first, so we're gonna punt to him.
It's a different spoiling.
Yes. So I will share how I did not see this movie the first time. So I saw a post online, actually from Industrial Light and Magic, who have been really promoting this movie. They are very proud of their work on it, and I think for due reasons. I think they did a really nice job on these effects. And it was an invitation to a fan preview event. And in my world, fan preview event means a screening of the movie early. And I went, rearranged my schedule, got my friend to meet me downtown at Boston Common AMC, shout out. And we waited in line for 2 hours to get into this event. And as the event began, they revealed that this was going to be a live streamed Q&A of Gareth Edwards in LA, featuring 3 scenes of the movie, not the full movie. And it took all the people in Boston who were most excited about the creator and ruined their night, because everybody was livid. And on review, like, I read the pass closely, like, it never said, like, they didn't promise anything. It's just the appearance was
right. Legally, they were okay.
And it looked exactly like any time. I mean, I think a lot of people go to these things if you live in a major city. You know, you see free pass. It's just what they did for Ahsoka a few weeks ago. It's like 2 seats, not reserved, like get in if you can. And so everybody got there early. The kid in front of me had driven up from Connecticut. I did not talk to him after the event to see how he felt about his.
Nor should you. No one from Connecticut should be talking.
His 2-hour drive, and then I'm sure probably $30 in parking, because he had to sit there for 2 hours before the movie night. Like, I don't know. So I was very crabby that night. My friend ran out after the first scene. So the 3 scenes were, scene number 1 was the opening of the movie, and my friend was like, I don't want to see this. Like, I want to enjoy this movie in context.
Right.
And so he just like got up and left, and I respected it. But he's like, don't you want? I'm like, I'm here. I'm going to sit here. It's like going to a Comic-Con panel. Like, I rearranged my night. I don't get a lot of nights away from the kids. Like, I'm going to do this. So it was that scene. And then it was the actually finding of Alfie in the facility up until the helicopter thing blew up, the plane blew up. And then the third one was
scene.
the running robot bomb dudes on the bridge up until Alfie stopped them.
Oh, on the bridge?
That's pretty late.
Very
It's pretty
late in the movie because somewhere in the middle of my actual screening, I was like, "Oh, we haven't seen the bomb guy yet," and I didn't remember all the details, but I remembered the running bombs because they were a really kind of unique, cool thing. So, so I saw those 3 scenes. I saw Gareth promoted a lot and learned lots of cool things about it and behind the scenes stuff. Some great stories, but when I left, there were just like probably 20 people out in the lobby just yelling at the PR lady. And shame on the studio for putting some poor PR intern at the head of this, right? And like people went and bought popcorn and a couple beers and were like, right. And then it's like, oh, you're going to be here 40
Right,
minutes.
they were settling in for the night.
It was bad. And they were giving out posters and people
Wow.
were like, I don't want your poster. Like, and they were promising like, we never promised. So that's why I proudly put my poster behind me because it's hard fought that I had to survive that. So, but I will say, as
Nice.
grumpy and nerd angry as I was that night, it had long since left my mind of like things I was mad about. So I was not jaded by that going into the movie. But since we're in spoiler territory, I will also say my actual screening was ruined only slightly by my friend and I tried to order Oktoberfest and they were tapped out of Oktoberfest at the bar, which any Boston bar not serving Sam Adams, I think, has to close just in general. So they said, what cans of beer do you want? I swear there's a point to this. So there are cans of beer way back behind the bar in a cooler. And I was like, I'll take that purple one, not knowing I got an extremely high alcohol content beer for this screening. I got a 90-minute IPA. So at some point about halfway through the movie, I can't read the can anymore. Like I hadn't really looked at it. I just had figured out, I'm like, oh, I'm drunk. Like this is a very strong beer. And I remember I paused and I sat in the movie theater and I looked around at the people like behind me and I'm like, wow, we're all doing it. It's like the magic of cinema, man. We're all just images on a screen and we're just loving it. And we're all watching the same story. And so I, about halfway through the movie, I'm like, this is the greatest thing I have ever seen in my life. Like, I can't believe it. And then I think both because the movie kind of goes downhill in the last third, in my opinion, and also I had finally eaten enough popcorn that I was sobering up. I was like, oh, okay, this is fine. And I probably overreacted a little. So all my comments should be seen through that.
No, okay, that's a good call. But I think, regardless of, independent of the influence you may or may not have been under, I feel like your description of how the experience of the movie goes is pretty accurate for me as well, because I feel like the first act and that first scene I feel like is very smart to show an audience, to tease them, because that was, to me, I was hooked right away, where I was like, ooh, like alternative history, like what, like, and using sort of, the word atomic keeps coming up today, I guess, but using kind of like the atomic age 1950s sort of vibes to sort of overlay and kind of color a more modern, like, what if World War III broke out over AI. I feel like I was like, yes, I'm very in. And then, when John David Washington's character, is it Sergeant Taylor, they introduce him, I'm like, oh, okay, cool, I've seen this character before, like grumpy ex-military person who gets dragged into one last mission, like, all right, I'm good. And then like all the sort of Blade Runner-y stuff where you meet the simulants and you figure out that their likeness has been lent out, and so there's multiples of them running around and all. And then it was really once we sort of hit the Nirmata, like, destroy nomad, like that last act, I feel like is sort of when it lost me, and I was just like, oh, like, and which is I feel like is such a shame, because so much of the emotions of those final sequences depend on you being like, I am invested in this relationship between Taylor and Alfie, and I feel like it wasn't quite there, and so then I was like really much more disengaged with the plot, because it takes such a relationship focused turn. But yeah,
it felt like there were a few moments where it was just sort of like, and anyway, this is true now. Like, there's a character that's just like, and this is an important thing that everyone needs to know. okay, let's move on. And then they moved on, and it was like, but like there's so much, actual kind of narrative storytelling, building, attempting to sort of build the relationships between the characters, especially between Alfie and Taylor as the sort of the central one, and then kind of in the background, his Taylor's commitment to Maya, his wife, is also clearly important, and that's happening. But then there would just sort of be, anyway, this is what happened, or this is what the reality of things are. That was like, wait, we're just going to breeze through that or past that, and then at the end, it's sort of the culmination of the world building conflict that's going on with the interpersonal relationships, and I understand what they were going for, but it was, let's just like, we're not really on the rails with all of this because of there were some shortcuts that seemed to have been taken. And if you think of telling any story, making any movie is spinning all of these plates. They definitely let a couple of the plates fall to the ground and break. And we're just like, anyway, but we're still good, right? And it was like, sure. Okay, like you're doing a good job with these plates. But I think those ones that are in pieces were also important. And you let them fall.
I just wanted to keep letting that metaphor spin.
I think
I thought there'd be like a
I know. I was speaking of spinning plates.
Go ahead, Jen.
Kept going.
No, it's fine. I think you we're in spoiler mode, so you could have said when that random guy that we barely know reveals that Maya was Nirmata all along.
It was
feel things, and we don't.
Yeah, the two for me was Maya was Nirmata all along, which was sort of like, to me, and I mean, you sort of hint at it in the question. That was like very obvious. It was just sort of like, well, of course it's going to be that she was Nirmata because it's a lot of like her dad. But then there's like a reversal of it a little while later where it's like, well, my dad was Nirmata, but then I became Nirmata.
Right.
And it's like, so, okay, it wasn't that the intelligence was wrong. It was that it was just
outdated.
Yeah. And also, like, your dad's still important, but we're never going to hear from him or about him, except that maybe was her dad Ken Watanabe, and he, like used his likeness. I don't know, but like that's not text. That's canon. I'm bringing that in. The other one that was big was like when Taylor Joshua is in. I think is he locked up in prison? He's talking to Ken Watanabe at one point, and Ken Watanabe is like, AI didn't actually nuke LA. Like that was a human error. And it was like, oh, that seems really important for the arc of what's happening. Like, that's it, huh? That's all we're going to do is just going to say that. No one in America, none of the military leaders or political leaders who seem to be the same people in this world, which was cool. All that stuff was cool. The anti-imperialism about the American military, I thought was fun. I don't know if fun's the right word, but was well done and interesting. But it was sort of like, oh, maybe we need to reckon with that. And that's something that we need to actually deal with. It kind of just felt like it was like, don't worry, don't feel bad. You're rooting for AI. They didn't do anything wrong. And that felt really kind of half-assed or even quarter-assed in the context of the story that they were trying to tell.
Right. So to me, that moment kind of speaks to why I think this actually works better as a war film than it does as a science fiction action adventure, if that's what we're going to call it now, or epic. I don't know. Yeah, I feel like because that kind of dialogue usually shows up in a like when you're trying to complicate the politics of a war and be like both sides, because I feel like this movie is very much like both sides are wrong. And both, you know what I mean? Like, but we can understand why both sides are fighting. I think that the Allison Janney character, her best scene is when she's telling Joshua about how she lost both her sons in the war, right? And like why you in that, and I wish there was just more of that, because in that small scene, it's like 30 seconds she's talking to him probably. You understand everything you need to know about her character and why she's there, right? Whereas I feel like with even Joshua, his motivation is very clear. He only cares about Maya. He doesn't care about the war anymore, right? Like that, they make that abundantly clear. It's not confusing at all. But I feel like because we only get these sort of like ethereal flashbacks of the two of them together for most of the movie, I just like we literally don't know anything else about him. And who he was when he was in those flashbacks, you know what I mean? And so for me, it was just like a lot harder to care about him. Even though John David Washington's doing a fine job, like I feel like as an action adventure star, like or action movie star, he's doing great. Like, but yeah, I don't know. Something about the screenplay is like there's stuff missing.
Well, yeah, to that point, I was going to say there's a really interesting sci-fi kind of debate about the fact that he has, robotic appendages and prosthetics. There's the word. And I was just thinking as you were talking, I'm like, wait, yeah, they didn't ever explain how he needed those, right? Are these, I think we fill in the blanks. It's like, oh, it must be old war injuries but like maybe it's actually probably more compelling if he was born in need of prosthetics. And so he's always been assisted by some form of the robot technology. And, I think you're right that by setting all of that aside, it becomes more of a war picture within that. And maybe that's my problem. So what I said when I walked out of the theater on the elevator/escalator ride down is I said, I think what was missing is one really good scene that showed you the bond between Alfie and Sergeant Taylor.
Yeah.
And there's this would be another thing for PT's list. Late in the movie, it's like, Maya? I already forgot. Maya gave the fetus's likeness to. She donated the fetus's likeness to be that. So this is their child's likeness
to be Alfie,
turned into a weapon AI, and that again is like, oh wait, that's fact. Like that has happened, and I think part of the relationship shuffle is like once that happens, it's like this is my child now. Whereas before it was like this is the kid I have to like use to get to my wife. Borat my wife or Harrison Ford my wife? Harrison Ford my wife, I think in that case. My wife, yeah, the other one. My wife. So I gotta find my wife. And so there's a shift there where, this is now my child. I think we're supposed to just go with like now he cares so much about Alfie, but it never felt like they were bonded. They have the quote I picked was this cute but kind of not that important seeming conversation in passing on a train as they're on the run. And it's like, I never really believed that relationship. So then when it comes down to he will sacrifice himself to save her and we are all happy about that, it's like, well, there's a level which we are because it's a kid being saved, but it just didn't feel like the movie had earned the level of pathos they were aiming for.
The biggest comment I left on my survey back when I saw the screening in May was exactly what you just said. And I spent I crammed in the margins. I wrote so much. I was like, we need to see the turning point at which Taylor changes his view on AI and his view on Alfie. Because, you're my kid now is really, you're right. Is like really the only thing. And I said, we need some scene earlier on where I understand what flips the switch and what makes them bonded to each other. Because he's starting to see through Alfie, like these AI are sentient beings, like they aren't just programming, right? Because his big thing is they echo he does, and then a couple other minor characters say like, they can't feel anything, it's just programming, right? That's the way to kind of emotionally cut off from the simulants, right? So I was like, we need a scene where like he realizes, this is not programming, this is a person, right? And then so that the ending is more meaningful. Like I literally wrote all of that in the survey. They clearly didn't get the
memo. I was
gonna
say they didn't invite you back after your crazy person filling.
I know, right?
They're like, well, this one person in Orange County wants us to reshoot a third of the movie.
Right?
Let's put that one over here.
Put her in the maybe pile.
I feel, I think both of you are completely right about that. And the thing is, it feels like for a lot of the movie, I think I was giving the movie too much credit on a narrative level where I was like, this is all happening like under the surface. This is all behind the scenes, to the point where that scene that you were talking about, Jen, with Alice and Janney, where they're on the sort of drop ship and she's like, let me tell you about what happened to my sons. I was like, none of that ever happened. Like she's manipulating him. That's the lie. She tells him, we're going to find out.
She's
that, like,
crying.
Later. Yeah, because she's good at her job. She's good at emotionally manipulating like sucker military guys that
I should have
she.
mentioned Avatar at the in recommendation.
Well, so
because
that's
she's like the villain from
Yeah, she is
Avatar.
an Avatar.
yes,
Whose name I
but
don't remember.
but then it's like because there isn't actually that nuance of like she's like there isn't that extra layer, and there is like you sort of are seeing that there's the sort of steps of okay, well now she the weapon has a name. I got to call her Alfie instead of this bot. So all right, I guess I need to do that. And like my old friend who fought with me against the AI has got an AI girlfriend. So okay, I guess like maybe that means it's a little bit different. I was sort of seeing these steps, but then when it started to just sort of be anyway, like here's what you need to know, and it was this Cliff Notes kind of rushed version of it instead of actually seeing scenes of growth. And I think that Greg's point of which I had forgotten about of the sort of like, oh, anyway, yeah, this thing's important to you because it reminds you of a real human that could have existed and the wife that you wanted all along. And he's just like, why, yes, I do care about this robot now.
Yes.
That like, it takes away from the possibility of really engaging with that question of do we need to care about, does he need to care about these robots as their own sentient beings? And, that's why I think something like Avatar, which is a good comp as well, we didn't talk about, and District 9 as kind of like, oh, right, we need to think of these not as others, but as equals, or at least as similar. It never quite comes together. But it looks so damn cool. I still want to recommend people go see it, even though, it doesn't. It does go off the rails.
Well, and I was just thinking about when Allison Janney first enters, she has a little monologue about Neanderthals. Now I'm still on my beer, so I can't say that word. But yes, and it's like, wait, how does that piece fit in? That we were supposed to be like, if the Neanderthals had been able to fight back, they'd still be here, and so we're rooting for humans because we're Neanderthals in this. Like, so to PT's point, it's like there's so much good there, and it's just not quite connecting. And I will say in the Q&A from the event I went to, Gareth made some jokes at the prompting of the host of like, well, my movie better come out or else it'll be a documentary because AI is catching up that fast. And like, I was kind of interested if that's how the studio was telling him to kind of play this, because
to market
this is just so not concerned with any of the AI questions we all are talking about. I'm sure you all go to meetings as much as I do where AI comes up, and it's like, yeah, we're really asking really hard questions about so much of this stuff now. And maybe that has made this movie outdated from when they shot it last year, right? Like that's not beyond the realm of possibility, but it's just not concerned with those questions. Where I will give it some credit, not just to be about this, I do think it echoed Rogue One in this really cool way. One of the most striking images in Rogue One to me is when the stormtroopers are walking through Jeddah City on patrol around a tank, and you're instantly like, that those are U.S. soldiers in the Middle East, and you're like, wait, the Empire is the U.S.? Like, oh no, are we the baddies? And like Gareth knew what he was doing. Star Wars kind of took a chance doing that. That's a little more politically on the surface than they usually get. And so I did like that this continued that trend, and it really didn't pull its punch at the end. That like, no, like we, the United States in this case, or, kind of humanity also in some ways, are like really terrible. And we should be rethinking this and questioning what our government tells us, even if they say their two sons died in the war or what have you. So, to me, it was like, okay, this is a little subversive in a way I really dig, even if it doesn't quite land the plane/helicopter.
Right. And I think, there's a lot, and I'm not the first person to point this out by any means, but there's a lot of the Vietnam imagery from the Vietnam War and films about the Vietnam War. I mean, Greg mentioned Platoon at the beginning. My Letterboxd review actually was like Platoon with saying Platoon, but make it robots be too reductive. It sounds like the answer is no. But I think it uses that visual shorthand really well, I feel like, from that perspective, right? To be like, oh, like, and there's a moment where and also like animals in this movie. That was another thing. I was like, why are we? There are 2 scenes with dogs where dogs are in mortal danger, and I'm like, we just don't need this. This movie doesn't need this. I don't need this. But yeah, sorry, I'm getting sidetracked. But there's in that the scene where the soldier, it's like Allison Janney's second in command, is threatening to shoot a dog if they don't tell them where Nirmata's lab is, and there's a woman who says like the AI have bigger hearts than you or something like that, right? And I feel like so the American imperialism part of this, I think, is very affecting. And but also because I've definitely heard critics talking about how that also makes it kind of problematic because of the way that the film, not the U.S. soldiers in the film, but the way that the film is sort of representing Asian culture and kind of Asia, and like are we doing a harm by kind of digging up that very traumatic history and then just using it for the science fiction film? I don't know. I've heard lots of debates around that. So what do you 2 think about sort of the Vietnam War as sort of like subtext here?
Well, I just thought you were asking us thoughts are on
Vietnam War.
No, sorry, I was just trying to think of the way to end that. Yeah.
I mean, we just needed a couple more years, and I think we would have pulled it out. My little capsule review, which I didn't write on Letterboxd, but I did say, was that like the Gareth Edwards one night was maybe got a purple can of beer or some other mind altering substance. It was like, what if all Asian people were robots? And that was his impetus for this, because there was something really interesting. Where it felt like, is this offensive? Is this othering, I guess, to set it up this way? Or is it almost empowering about like, look, America can't handle like differences. The whole melting pot thing hasn't really worked out in America recently. So we have to look to other parts of the world that would be actually open-minded and welcoming of someone different. But I do think not necessarily the Vietnam War parallel component to it. Shout out to the Ewoks and Endor as another moment where Star Wars got really political. Just to note that, but that I do think that the District 9 comp is maybe my favorite one, because it's just so obvious that it's like, oh, like there's an enemy and there's an other, and the other needs to be hunted down and destroyed, and that it is a this sort of war on terror element of we got attacked once and we're just gonna like spend a decade and a half going out trying to eradicate this problem that like it's out of the bottle. Like you can't do that. These are beings that exist that are off doing their own thing, and maybe they're just trying to live their lives, and the fact that you're hunting them down is why more of them are signing up to do militant action. So I do think there's a District 9 element, and I think that Greg's Rogue One comparison is also very good. There's something in I know Gareth Edwards didn't develop the Rogue One story on his own, but that there is something to the stories he wants to tell. I think there's also a little bit of it in that Godzilla of like sort of this American military might being used in kind of bumbling, every problem's a nail approach to issues out in the world, and that the people that we think of as the enemy are actually just humans who are trying to get by and are not all evil beings trying to hurt us.
It sounds like we're naturally moving towards the rhetorical situation by talking about like outside context and how that impacts. Before we move there, since we all have sort of lauded the world building in this movie, is there some detail that I think for Greg, he mentioned earlier the running bomb robots. But is there like what were some other highlights in terms of things that really made the world, either a shot that you really liked, because we have also talked about the cinematography, or just something that you really loved from this?
I want to bracket my answer to this question by saying I felt this movie proved Gareth Edwards directed Rogue One. A whole bunch of Reddit message boards would have you believe that when the reshoots happened, they got rid of like all of his influence and he just pretended and played nice in the press and said, yes, I still directed this. It so much was reminiscent of Rogue One, and it shot composition, even though it's a different DP. And, I'm like, oh no, Rogue One is definitely a Gareth Edwards movie. And, I think there are plenty of people out there who talk about the reworking of the script over time. It's just what happens on these big franchise ones. And we should stop pretending that Kathleen Kennedy is uniquely monstrous in her overseeing of these projects. Because I really like that, because I think Gareth Edwards is a really likable guy, and it just feels like, oh, okay, he did get to create the movie he really wanted to. And even if there were changes later, I have noted in his press tour he has not said anything other than it was a great experience and he loved it. And I think that's obviously good career move, but also true. So to answer the question, I actually loved a huge number of the shots of the Nomad satellite, which I think you're that's the big kind of breathtaking moment. And if you are too grumpy and you're like, the scale doesn't quite work all the time, and then they attack it above Los Angeles, but it falls down in South Asia, and there's some things like that. I actually wanted there to be 10 of them, and then the end makes it clear, no, there's one Death Star we're blowing up. But I think the kind of, it probably got overused by the end, and it was in the trailers, but the way it shines its kind of target reticle thing light down, and so you'd get these really beautiful sweeping shots of a landscape, and they just put this kind of light over and across it, and it's stunning every time, and it's really cool. And then the second one I'll shout out is actually the very start of the opening scene after the newsreel, where the special ops troopers rise out of the water with their lights already on. I thought was really, that's where I got amped up. I'm like, yes, this movie is everything I wanted it to be, and got really into it. So those would be a couple of my favorite elements.
Was that when the beer first started kicking in? Is that
AMC's 20 minutes of trailers? So yeah, that sounds. It was hitting the bloodstream.
Yeah, there you go. Right.
I love having these conversations, and I love when one of the two of you just takes a whole paragraph out of the notes I took, and is like, oh, they also thought that, so I don't have to go into that. But that sort of Rogue One comp of oh, Gareth Edwards did direct that movie. There is no doubt anymore. But I think that sort of the addition or the addendum to that is, I don't know if either of you have seen the Gareth Edwards Godzilla, but it's interesting that I kind of I haven't seen it since it came out, but my memory is it had a lot of the same problems as this one, along with a lot of the same benefits, which is I'm wending my way around to answer Jen's question, which was say something nice about the movie, sort of. But that part of why Rogue One works better than I think those other two movies is because Tony Gilroy came in and was messing around with the story, and I don't think he changed 80% of the story or anything like that, but I think that he added clarity, and I think that the progression to Andor and the other things he's worked on show that he's I'm good at getting this story across, and maybe taking these pieces and lashing them together. But the Godzilla has, I think, similar issues of when you get down to the human level and the characters interacting, you're like, what exactly is happening? And how is this progressing? And what is the sort of thematic tie? And it's not that I don't think that Gareth Edwards is thinking about that, but I don't think he has the James Cameron doing Avatar gift of simplicity of I don't want to get complicated here, that in a way Tony Gilroy might want to have layers of complications, but I just want to have a simple story and build my sci-fi world around it. And I think James Cameron's really good at getting a almost asininely simple story done effectively, and that can make Avatar make $2 billion each time it comes out so far, and whereas Gareth Edwards has, it's sort of what, and you get a little lost. But in Godzilla, in the sort of visuals of Rogue One, and again in this movie, there's something about the scope and scale of what he can do, and recognizing sort of here are these characters, and then every once in a while, let's take a step back and let's just have them be this tiny little thing on the screen, and let's look at this huge world around them, and what is happening out there. And that was true in sort of the urban cityscapes, which were very Blade Runner, very cyberpunk, traditional, but then also these different rural settings where there's some sort of futuristic castle in the background, or a mining facility or military compound, or some like what looks like it would have been an ancient village, but it's clearly been built up and augmented in a futuristic sense. All of those shots and that sort of visual world building, I think it does so much for the story. It does so much for my enjoyment of the movie. And I think that is what is allowing us to forgive all these sort of, I don't want to call them nitpicks because they're serious. Some of them are serious complaints about the structure of what actually happens with the characters. But I think that you can sort of be like, okay, I'm going to let that go because I'm just happy to be sinking into this world and watching all these things interact at the sort of individual local scale, and then also this super wide lens of this landscape imagery.
I think what we're kind of all circling around is that, or what PT was just saying is that he seems to have one foot stuck in each type of world, right? Like he's not quite committing to doing the Avatar thing, but not quite doing the Arrival thing, right? And so this movie feels like it is kind of caught in between two genres a little bit. But for me, I just love the level of detail that we got in so many things here, right? From like and I think my favorite thing probably was that in this world, we don't just get one type of robot, right? We have the simulants and the sort of like whatever version came before them, like the like that has like the not human head, but that both of those kind of behaved in very similar ways and dressed in similar ways. So I mean, to counter argue a point that I made earlier about questioning kind of the use of the Vietnam War and the use of Southeast Asian culture and stuff like that, I feel like just seeing robots dressed as monks was like, I've never seen that before. And that's very cool. Like that this world is a place where there would be both human looking and not human looking robots wearing orange robes, like they're monks. And that like, but again, like that's part that, but then that also makes me think, well, that's part of the unrealized potential of this, is that we never actually really learned anything about how that came to be, or like why is that, or whatever, right? But just the same, I really loved that, and I loved the lending of your likeness, donate your likeness. The very Blade Runner-y kind of ad that we see, I think does a lot of work to be like, oh, like to deepen the world and to be like, oh wait, this is a world in which not only does this happen, but it's commercially popular, right? Like to the point where there's like a billboard ad in like a Times Square kind of like cyberpunk setting. And I also, this is the last thing that I'll mention, is that the because we haven't talked about it all yet, but the idea of harvesting someone's memory because they have only died recently, and like the time that you get with them after death is proportionate to how recently they died, right? Because I think Allison Janney's character says like he's been dead more than an hour, like we only got 30 seconds or something like that, right? But the idea, like whatever machine, again, they don't explain it, but like whatever machine she has, like Cerebro type helmet thing that she puts on dead bodies, I thought was really cool, and from a like sci-fi, like as a proposition for a sci-fi world.
That was the
and does a lot for the story.
That was the IMF mask machine. It looked almost identical.
Jeez.
But I agree. Only cringed a little that felt like it was lifted from Dungeons and Dragons, right? With the ask 3 questions of the dead guy.
Right.
But agree that we're there. And just because you mentioned it, I saw on fanthatracks.com today, a website Jen writes for, there is a new Art of the Creator edition that's coming out. And if you buy the extreme fancy edition, you get a gold robot monk statue. So if this is not on your Christmas list, Jen, I think it should be. No price listed, but the regular edition is $75.
Oh, it actually does look like a golden Buddha. That's so funny.
That's funny.
It's like a golden Buddha, but then
yeah.
But it's just
there's
a robot.
something
That's
interesting. about the sort of conundrum of creating sci-fi stories, where there's a lot of things where we were like, we needed more. Like, why didn't we get more into whatever this is? But then we also, I think, all like when there's a sci-fi story and it's just like, oh, the world is built because there's something outside the edges of this movie. Like, there's all these things.
Right.
Like there must be a story about the sentient AI robots turned to Buddhism, or created something and took the imagery of Buddhism, and is that just kind of related to the fact they were welcomed in Asia, or New Asia as they keep calling it, after being cast away in America? Like, interesting. Like, I do want to know more about that, but maybe that doesn't really fit in the movie. Maybe explaining that you can tap into people's memories, it's just sort of like, just go with it, like it's fine.
Right.
I think it might speak to the fact that there are these, like we mentioned earlier, these core story, like clearly like central to the story, central to the characters, moments, jumps that are undercooked or underexplored, that make us almost like grasping for, okay, well, we didn't get that, but could I have gotten like a tight 2 minutes on the brain scan like technology? Is there something there that I could have been given more on? So yeah, I guess it is interesting that it almost feels like an inherent trap of the sci-fi.
But yeah,
world.
maybe
Cool
it's
stuff. We want
maybe
more.
it's more that if we're asking for more, that means that it's not implied enough, right? Because I'm thinking the contrast I keep making, and this is very on brand for this podcast, is Dune, right? I'm like, Dune is doing all the things, right? Dune is checking all the boxes, and this is only checking about half the boxes. So I feel like, what is the difference? And I think Dune is very much a sci-fi world where it's making us work for it, right? We have to kind of learn as we go and pay attention and be like, oh, okay. But I feel like there's a consistency there that allows you to do that. Whereas this is like, oh, she's like, oh, I just have this machine and we're not going to talk about it or like contextualize it at all. And it really only comes up when she uses it, and that's it. And then it almost seems like a means to an end, like a plot device, so that Taylor has the little thumb drive of his dead wife for the ending, right? Like, like it seemed like that was more the point of including it, as opposed to like thinking about what role a device like that would play in the world and how we can kind of build it in from the start. I don't know if I'm explaining that well, but yeah, so maybe it's a consistency thing where it's like, and like sliding in exposition, like you would hide vegetables and food for kids, like to be like, it's as we go, you're learning things, as opposed to someone stops and explains it to you, right? Like, I don't want that.
Well, yeah. It's possible Denis Villeneuve is a better director than Gareth Edwards. And I mean that as no disrespect to Gareth Edwards, but I do think between Arrival and Dune, we are talking about how someone's doing this at a really high level, and this movie doesn't.
Although Denis Villeneuve have source material and Gareth Edwards does not. So maybe that's a good...
Well, I was thinking about, I read somewhere on the internet this week, and now I'm terrified it was Jed's blog, but how the difference between Tolkien and C.S. Lewis. You didn't talk about C.S. Lewis, did you? So the way I read this on the internet, and it's just true to my experience of those two writers, is Tolkien created his world and then decided to tell a story in it, whereas C.S. Lewis told a story and then's like, sure, Santa can be in it. Like, well, I need a lamppost. And so this is apparently something Tolkien and C.S. Lewis fought about, despite being very, very good friends, because Tolkien's like, you can't just put a lamppost in the woods. Like, that makes no sense. Like, you can't do this. So the idea that... House of R talked about. That's where it was. Thank you. So yes, I thought that also might be Gareth Edwards. Gareth Edwards thinks of a really cool story and gives us some amazing visuals. And as we switch to Rhetorical Situation, one of the things on my mind as we're thinking about these war movies, we haven't mentioned Apocalypse Now. Apocalypse Now is aided by a very linear movement up the river, and that becomes a way through the colonial history of Vietnam. And so
the horror.
There are all these like layers that we know. And I just think this movie thinks it might be doing that, but without a kind of very literal way. We don't understand the relationship between the city and the castle and the Buddhist monastery. But I think those are all ways in which it's trying to do that same thing. So that was the other comp I had.
We're now ready to go. We've already started, but we're ready to officially go into the Rhetorical Situation, a segment in which we look at a film through the lens of our academic experience. So, in the teaching of writing, the rhetorical situation refers to any contextual factors that influence composing and interpretation. We've already talked about a couple of contextual factors, but the big one I feel like we haven't really dug into is AI itself. And sort of Greg alluded to this, I think, or someone alluded to this at the beginning, the idea of the discourse surrounding AI and how AI is a very hot topic right now. And in theory, the movie should be primed to cash in on that, right, and participate in that. But I feel like I've seen so many reviews that are like, this film seems to have nothing to say about AI. And so do you feel like, what do you think's going on there? Like, do you think I guess we should start with, like, do you feel like the discourse about AI in our real world is kind of like unfairly interfering with the movie, or what?
Potentially it's unfair, because I keep coming back to it because I hadn't sort of made this connection. And when Jen said it, I was like, yes, that's right. That, this movie has as much to say about AI as District 9 had to say about aliens. Like, it's just sort of like, right, these are others that exist to stand in for other humans in our actual real world. And, there's a little bit of a twist because we're maybe used to sort of seeing and hearing stories, especially when it opens with, and there was a nuclear bomb in Los Angeles. Immediately we're like, oh, Skynet, Terminator, like, got it. Like, I understand what's happening. And then it's like, well, what if instead, actually the Terminators aren't terminating, but they're just trying to survive. They're just people trying to get by. And that was about as far as it was taken, which I think is completely acceptable for telling a story. But I do think now with the WGA and with large language models and people sort of being worried about being replaced in various ways in employment situations because of AI, they are looking to this movie as, oh, what is this going to like say or comment? This could be really of the moment. But I think that you're right. It is kind of, the moment was made a year ago and a lot of things have changed since then. So it doesn't really speak to that, and it's not really trying to. And I think that holding it to that is maybe unfair to the movie, but is a victim of the rhetorical situation, as it were.
Yeah, and I feel like we in our classes we sometimes teach, or at least I do, this concept of exigency, of like, what's the occasion for writing this piece? How can you tap into the sense of urgency and that's topical and that someone should read this right now, and this is the exact thing you should be talking about right now. And I feel like this movie is experiencing that in reverse, where everyone's like, yes, this movie should be, talking about ChatGPT, and it's just like, well, we actually started making this before that was a thing. And actually just we're really just working in the like Blade Runner, like, is a human, can a human be exactly the same as a robot kind of discourse, and not in the sort of like in a way that Dead Reckoning I think is not, right? Dead Reckoning is like, hey everybody, there's an algorithm here. It's the villain of this movie, right? In a way that very, very much is conscientious of the discourse of the moment, whereas this I feel like is not. So
you're,
Greg,
you're saying it pays to be writing your movie up to like a week before the the release date, right? as the Tom Cruise McQuarrie method goes. Yeah.
After they got Jen's comment card, they need to call Tony Gilroy, get him in, and rewrite 20% of the story so it made more sense.
I think that is largely correct, but I want to try to think about where AI was last year. And so this is using a little bit. So one of the things Gareth Edwards was asked in the session was like, he was asked a lot about like, how is this responding to our AI moment? And he was very vague. I think in hindsight, it's because it doesn't. But at the time, it was like, I don't want to spoil anything. But he said one of his, somebody asked what inspired this film. And he said he was on a road trip across the Midwest. And he looked out across one of those beautiful cornfields, wheat fields, and saw like a very futuristic factory sitting out there, and was kind of thinking to himself about like, what is life like inside that factory? And I believe the story then went like, well, he figured out, well, it's probably not humans in there. It's, like the Rust Belt factories are often these days, it's all automatons. And so then started building the AI story out of that. And I think, to be fair, I think a lot of the visuals reflect that image. So I think it was more the visual aspect of like something super futuristic and something very organic, and that's how he did it. So if I'm trying to give this credit, I think, and I brought this up earlier, I'm really interested in how all the humans in this movie are using technology to fight the technology. And we have the prostheses that I already mentioned that aren't really remarked upon, but are clearly shown many times. Like it's a part of his character. And then like the gear and the weaponry often has some robotic component. The running bombs, most obviously, and it's not seemingly an AI, but the little robot is like, "Yes, ma'am, it's been a pleasure serving with you," and runs off to blow up.
Right.
And even in the initial raid on Alfie's base, there's like a woman who takes what seems like some kind of forklift and holds off the police by like activating this forklift gun machine thing. And so like in all those cases, it seems like the humans aren't actually doing all that they say they're doing. So if that's true, then in the context of the current moment, that makes me think about the 15 meetings I've been in the last month where I'm saying, yes, our students, and I'm going to simplify it here. Yes, our students might use ChatGPT to write a rough draft, but if they want a good final draft, humanity needs to work with the technology, use the tool to get to that upper level. Yes, ChatGPT could write a resume, but in 10 years, if everybody's turning in ChatGPT resumes for a job listing, nobody's getting that job. It's the one person who does something different than the generic bullet points of what it's like to work at Applebee's or what have you. So I think maybe there's something you could stretch and say it has something to say about like the way we, it's hypocrisy, the way we are so fearful of the coming of AI, but are totally using these tools all the time in a more reduced form. So I think I'm doing way more work than the movie is on that question. But if I were to try to say, like, how is it responding to this moment? That's part of what's on my mind. And again, the old fear of a robot is going to take your job, which is, when I say old, I mean 2 years ago, or every time I go to CVS and some human has to instruct me how to use the robot. So, I do think it's a little outdated. It's not of the current moment. I would tell the student who drafted this right now to be like, yeah, you should read a more recent article and check out, a couple other questions that may be going on. It's like, do you still get the student who's like, I'm going to write a argument about why they should legalize marijuana? And they're like, yeah, isn't that funny? And I'm like, dude, I've been reading these papers for 20 years. That issue's over. Like, you can write
Yes.
about what we should do with drug offenders in prison for marijuana. Like, that's an active part of this issue. So he's not on the active part of the AI issue. He maybe couldn't have been, because these effects clearly took time in post to put together. But I do think you can still see some of these questions about what it means to be human, and we'll be asking a lot of those questions in the next 5 years, I think.
I agree. To add one more movie detail and another anecdote and anecdata point to what you're saying there, Greg, is I think at the end of the movie when they Alfie finds the Maya to put the memory, the USB stick in, so we can have the decently emotional reunion between Maya and Joshua. But like the whole thing is that on Nomad, the big American $3 trillion ship that's designed to hunt down and eradicate all AI on the planet, they have got a whole bunch of AI stored up. Like they've got a bunch of empty robots ready and waiting to go because America, the American military leadership is not actually afraid of this. They have just created, they reacted. And again, it's sort of explained enough or really dug into, but it's sort of like somebody screwed up somewhere and they're like, well, we found an enemy, so we're going to we're gonna target that enemy and eradicate them, but we're gonna use all the good stuff that we can, even though we've got the whole public on our side of hating this enemy. So, that's another sort of component there. But again, I think that's more of a post 9/11 story than it is an AI, wrestling thing, which feels almost antiquated. I did see someone note of like, oh, so the terrorist insurgents take over a commercial airline and fly it into a big building that's a symbol of the America's military might, and they blow it up. Those are our heroes. Like, good job, the creator. But anyway, the other thing is I'll say is, this like, what do we do with the technology? Do we fear it? Do we not? I have heard people in the context of the faculty governance of USC who were like, we're really got to figure out how to find and punish the people who are using this, who then within a minute or two will talk about using ChatGPT for departmental memos or the things that they think of like, well, this isn't important, this is the busy work of my life. And it's like, yeah, they think your papers are busy work too. Like, that's why the students are doing this. They don't think it's important to actually do it. Like, it's kind of on you to make it seem important. So I think the three of us may be on a similar page of, this is not a thing that's going to rise up and destroy us. It's just a tool, and a tool that may be used as a cudgel to hurt people and divide people and take things away by those who are like, great, I can get more benefit from the shortcuts that will arise from this, and I don't need to maybe use all of my resources up here at the top of the pyramid. And there's, again, some of that could be seen in this movie, but like Greg said, I think that's a lot of audience work to sort of try to take this thing that is of situations context a few years ago and put it in this new AI context where it's not really trying to exist. It just happened to coincide with it.
Yeah, and I feel like there is still a pretty big chasm in discourse between sort of like immediate concerns about generative AI right now, sort of the stuff that both of you were just talking about, and sort of like a farther and more theoretical anxiety about sort of like the singularity, or this movie mentions like evolution, right? That AI being part of human evolution or something like that, right? And so I feel like this movie is very much concerned with the latter, right? Of like, if we keep using AI as a tool and as a subservient tool, right? Because like that's in the before times in the movie that they show, you get the implication that it's like, and it's in that reel at the beginning where it's like, they were our servants, they were our law enforcement, they were like, they did everything for us, right? In this very kind of idyllic way. And then it's like, well, because there wasn't any thoughtfulness put into that once they became sentient, right? Which is a big if, right? Like in our world, not nearly as many people are worried about AI becoming sentient and therefore human and deserving of human rights. Like that's still very much, I think, to my understanding, a very theoretical argument, right? Of like, if that happened and when, like, as opposed to when. But I feel like, this movie is very stuck inside of sort of like older concerns about AI that are kind of more abstract of like, well, if they became more like humans, how would we treat them? And like, how could we really tell if they were just programming or if they actually did have emotions? Like, these are conversations I've had with my students after, like, there's like an NPR, I can't remember what the show is, but they did a whole thing about Furbies, and they did like an experiment with kids where they had to like hold a Barbie upside down for a certain amount of time, and then they had to hold a Furby upside down. And then the idea was that the kids got very upset when the Furby started acting like distressed, but the Barbie, they were just like flip flopping around, and they're like, yeah, whatever, it's not a person. Like, so it's like, the idea of like simulation being more of, and our reaction to it and our emotions evoked by it being more of the issue than the technology itself and what's going on with the technology internally, I think is that definitely sort of like seems more wrapped up in this movie than like all the stuff that the more immediate concerns that you were both just talking about. Does that make it a bad movie? No. Right. But I do think that's going to bear on the success of the movie overall, is that people are yearning for something more immediate and nuanced about now. And this movie's just not going to be able to give it to them.
And I also think it somewhat ties into, I'm not just trying to segue to the next thing on the document about the question of how original is it? Because we and others keep being like, oh, this is great. It's an original science fiction movie because it's not tied to an intellectual property or some sort of pre-existing story that's out there. But it's not very original because it's drawing from all these earlier narratives. It's the unkind way to call it was say derivative, a pastiche maybe. But I think that that kind of pastiche element, the fact that we keep, or at least I keep coming back to another movie, another way in which it ties to some, it's a parallel to another story, another movie that's already out there, I think is maybe part of what stops it from even having the real potential of meeting the moment about AI, is because it's so busy looking back on Platoon, Terminator, Avatar, Blade Runner, Ghost in the Shell, like all these things that are out there that it's kind of picking through, that there's not really a lot of space for, really thinking about, well, what could this actually mean in the present tense, the present reality. It's more about like, here's a cool story. It makes a lot of sense. It's like, here's a cool story based on an image I saw once and it popped into my head. I thought of a bunch of things. How can I mine the things that I like to sort of tell my version of that story, which is a totally cool way to create fiction. But I think that, I guess all this is to go around to, as an answer to your original question, I do think it's sort of being maybe unfairly burdened with the moment in which it's coming out.
I would add to all those thoughts with also, I think it suffers because we are after Mandalorian and after The Last of Us and all these other lone wolf and cub narratives that, are inspired by literally the same thing, but got here much sooner. And I think the story grates on us a little bit because we've had so much of this lately. And maybe it's all Pedro Pascal's fault. That kind of sounds like who I'm blaming, but the storytellers who are saying this stuff or who are creating this stuff. So I think that's why it will never feel truly original, despite it used to be enough to take something. I mean, what is Star Wars but Hidden Fortress and turned into space? And you would think, oh, I'm going to tell this story and put it in an AI kind of world I've made up, and it should feel a little more original. But I think the kind of basic premise is just too familiar at this point. And in the nerd circles on top of that, right? Like, we can all be excited for original sci-fi, but it's like, oh, if we've been consuming these things, I'm saying this as if I've watched The Last of Us. Last of Us? Yeah, I didn't watch that show.
What?
But it's like, it's just that.
Good show, good game.
So we maybe need some fresh stories to rip off for a cycle, right? We need to alternate between things. But I think that's working against it feeling really original.
I now I'm trying to think, let's do the work, sort of like what Greg was doing earlier. Like, let's try to mine it for like what the originality could be. And the thing I keep coming back to is this idea of war fought over AI. I feel like we haven't really gotten as much. So like, yeah, the idea of, my Letterboxd review was a joke, but but the idea of Platoon but make it robots, right? That to me is the one thing in here that does feel fresh. And so like, when I think of this movie as a war movie that uses AI as the impetus for that war, I think it sits as a lot more original than once you start thinking about it as a film about AI. Then it becomes all then there are all these other sort of touchstones or a movie about a hero who bonds with a child, right? The lone wolf, like so I guess that's what I would say. I would leave it as like, if you are in the mindset of like, this is contemplating World War III if AI, evolves and continues from where it is today, and that it would sort of like divide the world in the way that it does in this movie. That to me seems kind of interesting. And then it's like the fact that it's kind of shot, and this goes back to both of your comments about the Rogue One comparisons, like the fact that it is shot like we get these like some of the best scenes are the ones where it's cutting back and forth between the different sort of military entities and parties, right? And like the fact that they both in the flashback where they're coming out of the water, but I'm also thinking of and this is probably the second one that Greg saw, but like where they're kind of trying to infiltrate the lab, right? Like, yes, it's horrifying, and we don't identify with them. They're very much the bad guys in that scene, but I feel like just like the tactical sort of urgency of it, and like the fact that they're kind of trying to work together to get this done, and like, and then it's horrific, and then once they get to Alfie, then it's like turns into this whole other thing, basically, I guess. But even like Allison Janney being like, rough day at the office when the other guy, when she meets up with the other guy and they both got caught in the police van, like that to me is where when this movie is at its best, because when it's like a gritty war film.
So my pitch, based on what you said, lean harder into Vietnam by making the two kinds of AI different factions fighting each other, and humans have to decide, are we going to fight alongside the kind of robot-y looking ones or the human simulants? And that way, like, oh, we don't mind killing robots, but now these robots look like us becomes a little more pressing. Or if maybe those are the enemy robots, the next evolution that they didn't allow. I don't want to lose the facility, that base. Very cool story from Gareth Edwards. That is an actual particle collider, and it hadn't opened yet. And they went there and found it in, I believe, Thailand, and asked if they could shoot in it. And they were like, well, what are you shooting? And then he's like, well, we'll do like limited explosions and just a little gunfire. And they're like, this doesn't sound so good. And so the studio said, you should really trust this guy. He's going to have a meeting with you. He's the director of a Star Wars movie. And the scientists were like, which Star Wars movie? And when they said Rogue One, the scientists said, you can take over our facility and shoot here as long as we get to be the extras. And so almost all the scientists you see in there are actual Thai scientists, or whichever country it was in. Apologies for forgetting. But I just love that it was like Rogue One was cool enough to get in. So
yeah. We keep saying Vietnam War. And I think that's still very much true, like, you know, especially when they're like in villages and stuff like that. But from what I could tell, anytime they're speaking an Asian language, it's Thai. So, and I know that as someone who doesn't actually speak Thai, but grew up listening to a lot of it. And so I can recognize the sounds of it as compared to like Vietnamese or something like that. So that I thought was weird too. I was like, wait a minute, like, is this a pan Southeast Asian move? Like, what is I'm like, I'm reading too much into it. It's just because probably because they filmed it there.
Well, the one thing I'll add, which I think is an important sort of addendum and maybe adds into sort of Greg's pitch for fixing it, is the originality of making a war film. And it's not like these aren't like World War II films, you know, like, which was the sort of Star Wars mold. It is the sort of America's the bad guy. America's the aggressor in Vietnam War movies. You know, at least the ones made after the late 70s. You know, it is about like American imperialism and the problems contained therein. And I think that the degree to which it extends into war on terror imagery as well includes that. And so I think that's something that's interesting. You know, again, the sort of an elevator pitch of what if it's the Terminator War, but it turns out that the robots aren't actually trying to fight. It's just the humans that are trying to conquer them in a classic American imperialist way. That's, I think, the undercurrent that they're going for. That is the most interesting. But again, maybe doesn't fully come to fruition. But I think looking at it from that perspective makes it potentially interesting. I do want to see Greg's version of it, though, where it's robot versus robot.
I think you just pitched the sequel to this movie. I don't know.
Even though I deeply appreciated that the movie didn't end with a clear sequel setup. I did think for a minute it was going to, but instead it was like, no, this had an ending, and you know the story will continue, but it doesn't feel like come back in 2 years and you'll see the next.
Right, Alfie will return.
Right. In
the creator too. All right. This will probably be pretty short, and I know we want to wrap up. So Oscars watch. Does this have any prospects at all? I sort of had flagged VFX, maybe cinematography, just because Greg Fraser's won before, and there's no Dune.
I think VFX for sure. I think that like there is a hole there. We were talking about it in our preview episode where I think I was like Dungeons and Dragons, which I would love for that to get nominated for visual effects, but I don't think it's, you know, likely. Whereas I think the fact this was such a small budget, as Greg was saying, it has this real sort of ILM stamp of approval. They're so proud of it that I think it could get the energy and momentum to come out of the nomination field to make it to the the words
Yeah, there's a
started
narrative there, right? There's a narrative of like, look what you can do on such a small budget.
Yeah.
And I've already saw an article of Gareth Edwards being like, the internet has so much misinformation about how I shot this movie. I think that was in Hollywood Reporter today.
The way he explained it in person was the way he got the budget down was an extremely small crew going to real locations to kind of guerrilla shoot like a quick few scenes and then just paint everything sci-fi on top of the real plate. Like, don't bother doing everything crazy on set. Don't bother going to the volume. I think he said he had to do a little pickup in the volume here and there, but it was like, let's just go get the real tactical feel of being there. The beach in Thailand where the raid is, he said they couldn't get the right kind of permits, so they could shoot there, but they couldn't close the beach. So he's like, if you panned away from that firefight at the end of the prologue, there's just like drunk people hanging out, partying, dancing in a club, and just like literally like 30 feet away. So yeah, I do think that's the one I would say it's got a chance at. It feels just prestige enough that they want to offer it to this instead of a muddy looking Marvel movie, or, you know, The Flash obviously has been made fun of for its visual effects. It is a light category. A lot of the blockbusters have light visual effects, so hopefully
Yeah.
it might get a shot there. And I'd like that. I'd like this to be on the list of things people have to watch if they're watching all the movies.
All right. Any final thoughts? I think before we wrap up.
I just feel like we've spent so much time talking about the problems. It is worth reiterating here at the end how much fun there is to be had in this movie, and how, you know, the taking in of this world was very enjoyable. And I think it's easy to sort of focus on what could have been done better. What are some of the flaws? But I mean, we recommended it back in the recommendation section, but I just want to reiterate, there's a lot of positives here.
To that point, I went.
We can't help
That's
being
true.
teachers.
That's true. I went with my friend Ben. He and I both, we got together. We went Friday night. We got together Saturday night too. And we told the crowd we both intended to go back. And I'd like to see it one more time on the big screen and just kind of take it all in and process some of these details that we talked about tonight. So yes, lest anybody think I have soured on it from the conversation. It is a fun time and well worth seeing.
Yeah, and just the fact that we don't often get movies like this. And I think that's something that I've seen a lot in reviews of, like, I think David Chen's review did a little bit of bait and switch, because his overall reaction, so his version of the short take, was like, this is incredible. This reminds me of what it was like to fall in love with movies to begin with, right? Like Blade Runner, this is going to become blah, 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 right? He had this like really bold statement about how wonderful this movie was. And then if you actually go and read his review, he's saying a lot of the things that we're saying of like, well, the screenplay is not great, and like, you know, some of the stuff doesn't make sense, but his thing was like, at the end of the day, it's worth pushing this movie because I'd much rather have something like this than like another Flash. Yeah. Basically, I don't think he calls out the Flash specifically, though that's would be. I think he would agree with me. Like based on how he reviewed the Flash. But yeah, I think it's just so nice to have more of this type of sci-fi in film. I think it's been a little while. And we can't just keep talking about Dune all the time. So it's nice to have something else.
Well, if it doesn't come out, like, what are we doing?
The trailer was still attached to this. I'm like, guys, like,
oh, yeah. Really? I didn't have it in mind. Oh, because you're AMC. I always go to Regal.
We had double Chalamet. So we had this trailers. And Wonka. That's a hard combo to process before this movie.
All right. Well, this was great. Hopefully people go see this despite us picking it apart. Though we did most of the picking apart in the spoiler section. Greg, where can people find you and all the great work that you do?
First of all, always a pleasure. I've been looking forward to this all week, really, since we hung up last time. I was like, we get to go see a new cool movie and then we get to talk about it. So much appreciated that we got to do that. This week, I'm just going to plug my Letterboxd. I'm at Obi-Wan Cass on Letterboxd, and my favorite social media platform is Letterboxd, but it's also the least social of the social media. So I think the burden is on all of us who love it to keep liking each other's reviews and following each other, and trying to make it a little more interactive, because it's a great service, but shouldn't just be for tracking data. So get on Letterboxd. If you're listening to this and haven't done Letterboxd, absolutely join Letterboxd and have a good time.
You and Sean Fennessy, Lords of Letterboxd. All right, and PT, where can folks follow and find the Long Take Review?
They can follow us on Instagram and on Threads at The Long Take Review. And if they want to communicate with us outside of a social media box, they can email us at thelongtakereview@gmail.com.
Great. And you can find me at Subchakchai, SOPCHOCKCHAI, on Instagram and Threads. And my letterbox is Qui-Gon Jinn. So a great pairing with Greg's. And I often use, I feel like I'm still using Letterboxd more as my own personal tracking system as opposed to a social media platform. And so I need to get on that. What are the secrets? That can be another podcast, how to use Letterboxd.
An insert special. On using Letterboxd. Greg teaches us Letterboxd.
All right. So go to the App Store, really download. Yeah.
All right. That's a wrap. Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you for listening. You can follow The Long Take on Substack at thelongtake.substack.com. Subscribe for free to receive reviews of films with Oscar buzz, as well as new films and series from pop franchises like Star Wars and Marvel.